Welcome to the Chattory with Jazz O'Brien. Jazz will take you on a journey through a wide variety of topics. Be ready to enjoy her passion for insight and knowledge. Please welcome your host, Jazz O'Brien. The podcast is starting in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, it's Jazz O'Brien. Welcome to the Chattory. And boy oh boy have I got a story for you today. This is not only a case that may appeal to all you true crime buffs and internet sleuths out there, but it's also a case which should be of interest to anyone who has the slightest interest at all in the sanctity and value of human life, liberty, justice, and frankly, all that's right and decent. It's a powerful and sordid tale, and one which maybe only a handful of you will be familiar with. It's a story which, frankly, were it not for the documented and publicly available official records, and therefore tangible paper trail, would be totally and utterly unbelievable. It's a story set in New York City in the United States of America, and it's the story of one guy who, without seeking to do anything except mind his own business, ended up taking on the system, and that guy's name is Sunny Sheu. It's worth mentioning at this point that every single document, video, letter and statement that I refer to in this episode is publicly available, and I've provided all the links to everything in the show notes for this episode, and which you're able to click on and view for yourself. The aim of today's episode then is to lay out the facts of Sunny's story by pulling together the scant information from the less than handful of sources that are out there on this, and hopefully bring the case to light to more people, and especially in the UK, where this story has had very little to zero coverage that I'm aware of. The way that I intend to go through Sunny's story is to divide it up into 3 sections, which are quite simply the beginning, the middle and the end. This is a tale which needs no added frills or fancy bits, believe me. Later in this episode, we'll hear from Sunny himself. But be warned, guys, this is a story so shocking that it's one which, to all intents and purposes, seems to have been suppressed at the highest levels of society, the mainstream media, the police and the judiciary. It's a story which, quite frankly, I still cannot forget even after at least a couple of years of knowing about it. And I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it, if I'm honest. So today, I'm going to share it with you. So here we go with the background to the whole sordid situation, and without further ado, let's look at our first section of this story, which is simply called The Beginning. To kick us off, let's properly introduce the main character of our episode, Sunny Sheu, who went by the name of Sunny Sheu, and who was born in Taiwan in 1970. At some point, and I'm not exactly clear when, because like I said a moment ago, the information is just not out there. But at some point, Sunny emigrated to the United States of America from his native Taiwan. Sunny was employed as a computer, hardware and software engineer, and he was also developing a kind of social media site, which he envisaged would be like a Facebook type of setup for Chinese-speaking people. All in all, coming to the United States had been a good move for this guy. He'd done well. Sunny, in partnership with his brother, Sue, had purchased his own home, which was a modest detached house at 4514 158th Street, and which is in an area called Flushing, which is in Queens, New York. Flushing is somewhat of an older town that was initially established in 1645 on the banks of Flushing Creek. Flushing has one of the fastest growing and largest Chinatowns in the world. And in 2019, the New York Post named Flushing as NYC's most dynamic outer borough neighbourhood. Some of you also, actually, may be familiar with this particular neighbourhood's name. If you're a tennis fan, Flushing Meadows will mean something to you because it's also in Flushing where the US Open Tennis Championships are held during the late summer months of every year. It's kind of the Wimbledon of the States. Anyhow, we digress, but the point is that Flushing is a busy, active, dynamic area, which is at the forefront of development and innovation. and at least once a year has the sporting eyes of the world, along with thousands of spectators, not to mention the international media camped out there. Fleshing is not some sleepy little backwater. So, with Sunny's background in technology and the cosmopolitan makeup of the area, no wonder then that Sunny and Sue chose Fleshing to set up home. In 2000, which I know seems like yesterday, but was 23 years ago, and at the age of 30, Sunny decided to release some equity from his home and basically remortgage or get a secured loan on his property. Sunny's brother, Sue, and Sunny agreed that the loan should be taken out in Sue's name, as Sue had a better credit rating and therefore would get a better deal. So, nothing untoward so far. Sue applied for the mortgage, and that was that. Or was it? Well, one spring afternoon in 2001, Sunny was at home having lunch when there was a knock on his door. When Sunny answered, there was some guy stood there claiming to be an inspection agent for a company called Tower Insurance. The guy at the door stated he was there to inspect the house for its new owners, to basically get an insurance quote. Sunny was slightly surprised, although not alarmed. He simply instructed the insurance agent that some mistake must have been made, since neither himself or Sue had requested any such quote, and that the insurance guy would need to go back to his office and explain the mix-up. Well, on further investigation and a few frantic communications later, what transpired was that the mortgage broker who Sunny had gone through to arrange the mortgage was actually a fraudster and part of a mortgage fraud gang. Yek Yun Chu, real name Roman Chu, had apparently forged Sue's signature on a power of attorney, which made it look as though Sue had given the fraudster authority to receive a mortgage from a company or a bank called Centex Home Equity and sell the house. Two other gang members, Amy Cheng, real name Jin Rong Wan, then acted as buyer of the property, and her boyfriend, Jin Gao, acted as a seller. In a nutshell, this meant that the gang had received mortgage monies for the house and conducted a fake sale. The forged power of attorney was signed and dated the 11th of February 2000, and the deed registering the sale to Amy Cheng was dated the 23rd of May 2000. The gang between them pocketed the mortgage cash, which had been forwarded by Centex, and disappeared off into the night. So, as far as the insurance company were aware then, Amy Cheng was now the legal owner of the property, and that's how come the agent from Tower Insurance had ended up at Sunny's home that spring afternoon. Although shocked and angry, Sunny reassured himself with the comforting thought that he should relax. After all, this was America, and he was confident that once he'd reported the fraud to the authorities, the situation would be resolved. Sheu had immediately alerted all relevant authorities and parties. He started with reporting the fraud to the police, and there's a copy of his complaint on record, so publicly available, and which is listed as complaint number 7167, and which Sunny made on June the 19th, 2000, from the 109th Precinct Police Station in Queens, New York, where detectives Keith Ng and Kin Lee were assigned to investigate the case. Sheu's brother Sue was able to prove to the police that he had been in Taiwan on the date of the fraudulent signing and could not therefore have signed the power of attorney. The police, after conducting initial investigations, were satisfied that Sue had not only not signed the papers, but also not received the mortgage monies from Centex Home Equity. Sunny had also contacted Centex Home Equity and its senior board members and advised them of the scam, in that Centex had actually been duped as they had paid out money to fraudsters. He then informed the title insurer of the property, which was basically the outfit or the firm that checked the deeds to make sure the correct person or people are registered as owners of the property, and was called Old Republic Title Insurance. A bit like our equivalent of the land registry in the UK, I think. Old Republic Title Insurance duly provided Sunny with a claim number as proof of contact regarding the matter. So, you'd think, wouldn't you, that with all the relevant authorities now being aware, they would sort the whole mess out and that should be the end of the story, right? Well, wrong. Sunny, oblivious to the fact that his problems were way from anywhere near being over, and confident that the mess was being resolved, kept sending his monthly mortgage payments to Centex. But Centex kept sending the payments back to Sunny, stating that they couldn't take his money as he was no longer the owner of the house in Flushing, and that according to the official paperwork, Amy Cheng was now the owner. Basically, the mortgage company were ignoring the fraud that Sunny had reported to them. In fact, what the mortgage company did next was unthinkable. On December the 12th, 2001, 22 months after the faked power of attorney and sale deed, Centex filed a lawsuit against Sheu and his brother Sue in the state Supreme Court in Queens County, seeking a default judgment on the property, arguing that Amy Cheng was not making payment on the mortgage, even though, as we know, Cheng was the fictitious name of the buyer at the fraudulent May the 23rd, 2000 sale. I mean, what the hell? Had they forgotten about the fact that they had been immediately alerted that this was all a big scam by Sunny or what? Certainly, they had been alerted as soon as Sunny became aware of the fraud, and as we mentioned earlier. Later, and recounting the story to a small, independent newspaper who later ran Sunny's story, Sheu told the Black Star News that this was just the beginning of his nightmare. So in addition to Sunny and Sheu, Centex listed as co-defendants the gangsters that had pulled off the scam in the first place and who were nowhere to be found. Amy Cheng, her boyfriend Jin Gao, as well as the broker who had initially orchestrated the mortgage fraud, Yek Yun Chu. Of course, the fraudsters, who'd long since disappeared into the night, did not show up. I mean, it would have been surprising if they had, right? So, just to sum up where we are then so far, we've Sunny Sheu and his brother Sue, who've basically had their house stolen by fraudsters. Sunny has alerted all relevant authorities as soon as he becomes aware. Yet, the mortgage company who have lost their money to the fraudsters are now trying to repossess Sunny and Sue's home by saying that the fraudsters, according to the authorities, now own the house but have not made any repayments on the mortgage. Well, as we said a moment ago, the case gets sent to the court and the case was assigned to a Justice Joseph Galaya in the State Supreme Court in Queens. Now, listeners, this is where our story takes quite the turn, because what you've heard so far is nothing in comparison with what's to come. And this is where we come on to our second intersection of this episode, which is to look at where things escalated to once the beginning we've just explained had happened. In other words, the middle bit of our story. Well, we've just said that Judge Galaya was the judge assigned to hear Sunny's case in the Supreme Court. Now, just before we go into the judge's decision and knowing what's coming up, it's important, I think, to look at who this guy is. Judge Galaya these days is retired from his post of judge and was last advertised on the internet as being associated with a law firm in America called Fins and Fins. I'm not sure how current that firm's webpage is, but we should assume it's up to date as it's still out there. Anyway, on the law firm's website, there is a page dedicated to Judge Galaya, and it's worth reading what it says on there about Galaya, as it kind of gives you the full picture of the magnitude of the experience and years of service, not to mention public respect this guy obviously commands and frankly demands. So here we go. Judge Galaya's page states, "The Honourable Joseph G. Galaya is of counsel to Fins and Fins. Judge Galaya has served as a judge for the New York State Supreme Court, the New York State Appellate Term, and the New York Civil Court. He is a former member of the United States Army Reserve, and shortly after receiving his honourable discharge, Judge Galaya began his legal career at the Hartford Insurance Group. Prior to his tenure on the bench, Judge Goliath served as the principal law clerk to the Honourable Bernard Dubin. He's been appointed to the Advisory Committee of the Assigned Counsel Plan and the Guardianship Roundtable Committee, and as an educational liaison of the 11th Judicial District for the New York State Judicial Institute Educational Committee. Judge Goliath was also appointed to the jury board of the 11th Judicial District. No, guys, we're not finished yet. Judge Goliath has a long-standing connection to New York's legal community, having served as the former president and member of numerous judicial and bar associations, including the Association of the Justices of the Supreme Court of the State of New York, the American Judges Association, the Criminal Courts Bar Association, the Supreme Court Justices Association of the City of New York, the Queens County Supreme Court Justices Association, the Corona Lawyers Club, the Catholic Lawyers Guild of Queens County, the District Attorneys Association of Queens County, the Association of Law Clerks to the Justices of the Supreme and Surrogate Courts, and the Queens County Bar Association. Nope, still not finished, guys. This guy's credentials are still coming. Judge Goliath has received numerous honours and awards for his distinguished public service. He received a presidential citation by former President of the United States, Gerald R. Ford. He has been named as Judge of the Year by the Assistant District Attorneys Association of Queens and the Columbia Lawyers Association, 11th Judicial District, and has been awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the New York Law School Alumni Association and the Republic of Italy. In his spare time, I'm surprised this guy has any, but anyway, in his spare time, the page continues, Judge Goliath enjoys collecting coins and stamps. However, he is most passionate about spending time with his family. And that's what it says on Judge Goliath's page. So, I think it's fair to say that what I've just read paints a picture of a highly experienced, super well connected, and therefore powerful member of New York's legal profession. Well then, with this in mind, I can only imagine how surprised you'll be when I tell you that the judge refused to allow Sunny what's known as discovery. What I mean by that is that Sunny was not allowed to provide the paperwork which revealed the fraud. And worse than this, the court, so the judge, allowed judgment in Sentex's favour, which basically meant that Sunny and Sue had lost their house. What the actual, right? Sunny was so bewildered and frankly disturbed by Judge Goliath's lack of action in a clear case of fraud that he immediately, and after Goliath's judgment, wrote a letter to New York State Chief Administrative Judge Jonathan Lippman, complaining about how his and Sue's house had been stolen, as well as accusing Goliath of bias and discrimination. Sunny quoted basically from the rulebook governing judicial conduct, which all judges are bound by, and in particular Part 100, Section 100.3 of the Code, which is headed Disqualification, and reads, quote, "A judge shall disqualify himself or herself in a proceeding in which the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, including, but not limited to, instances where the judge has a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party, or the judge has personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts concerning the proceedings." On top of this, Sunny had also stated that he would likely share his story with the media and requested that Judge Goliath recuse, which means remove himself from the case, to hopefully let common sense in the form of a new judge prevail. A week after the court hearing, when the mortgage company had been granted possession of the property, two of the three fraudsters who had perpetrated the initial scam and who we mentioned earlier, Amy Cheng and her boyfriend and partner in crime, Jing Go, were finally tracked down by police because of and based on the earlier complaint of forgery that Sunny had contacted police regarding in 2000. Again, the court's documents in the criminal case against the fraudsters is publicly available, and I've provided a link for you in our show notes for this episode, along with all the other documents referred to. Satisfied that the fraudsters were now being dealt with and that this would be the end of the matter, allowing normal conditions to resume, Sunny contacted not only Centex, the mortgage company, but also the court and Judge Goliath to inform them of the arrests. Surely this would make a difference, no? Well, Judge Goliath, aware of Sunny's complaints to senior judges and attempted contacts with the media, ordered a fresh hearing for April 2005, which was later, for reasons unknown, moved by the judge to May the 18th and 19th, 2005. So already, to just get to this stage is 5 whole years after the forged power of attorney came to light and Sunny had first reported it to authorities. Wow. The order declaring a new hearing should be held was apparently signed by Judge Goliath on the 17th of March 2005 and stamped with the Queen's County Clerk seal a week later. Sunny later checked for a copy of the order, which should have been a matter of public record, but he stated that when he last checked court records on the 24th of March 2005, there was no such entry or copy of such an order. The only order he found in the records at the time, signed by Judge Goliath on the 17th of March 2005, was a denial of Sunny and Sue's motion for Judge Goliath to recuse or excuse himself. So basically, what Sunny was saying here is that the judge had merely said that he was going to order a fresh hearing and did not. Sunny again officially asked Judge Goliath to remove himself from the case. Another whole year was to pass by before that day, which was the 12th of April 2006, when Judge Goliath, again answering the fresh motions by Sunny, finally handed down a new judgment in the case. Judge Goliath again denied the defendant's motion that he recuse himself from the case. However, some progress was made. The judge cancelled the fraudulent deed of sale of 6 years earlier, from the 23rd of May 2000, between Sunny and Sue and Amy Cheng. He cancelled the foreclosure or repossession order filed on the 21st of July 2004, and he cancelled and vacated the repossession sale of the 28th of January 2005. So essentially, the judge cancelled everything that had gone before. Finally, justice, right? Well, no, I'm afraid not. Once again, Judge Goliath awarded judgment in favour of the mortgage company, Centex, to foreclose or repossess the property. Judge Goliath's reasoning as to why Sunny should not have the house back was based on something called an equitable mortgage, under the doctrine of what's called equitable subrogation. Now, without being too technical, as I really don't want to move away from the main point of the story, what that means is that basically the judge was saying that Centex had been innocent parties and who had basically bought the house by lending the money for the mortgage, which they had never been paid back. More to the point, and the key thing here is, as far as I know anyway, is for that judgment to stick and for equitable subrogation to apply, Centex must have had no knowledge that they were paying money to fraudsters. Centex must have had no idea that this was a dodgy situation at the time they issued the mortgage monies. Equitable remedies in law only protect the innocent. So, if Centex knew they were giving money to fraudsters, they clearly would not be innocent parties. You know, while researching Sunny's case, one quote that really struck me was a quote from an interview Sunny gave with Black Star News, and I quote, "How can equitable subrogation apply to stolen property? This means if I have a lot of money like Centex, I can pay off anybody's mortgage anywhere without their permission and then take possession of their home and kick them out." End quote. Well, law is life, and in life, law and timing is key. I disagree with Sunny based on my own legal knowledge, albeit based on UK law, which in fact the law of New York is very similar to, because historically it was based on UK law. And as far as I'm aware, and please anyone correct me if I'm wrong, equitable subrogation can apply to stolen property if, in this case, as we've just heard, Centex had no idea about the fraud at the time of the completion of the mortgage, i.e. when they handed over the funds, because then, legally and equitably, Centex would be an innocent party. And let me tell you, very established principles in this area state that the law does not snatch goods from an innocent party, provided that party receiving, or more precisely purchasing the goods, had no knowledge of the fraudulent way in which these goods were obtained. This seems to be effectively what the court and Judge Goliath were saying. However, the legal rules that I'm familiar with also state that if the victim, so Sunny, moves quickly to alert authorities, then potentially he can be put back or restored to his initial position. In other words, Sunny would be able to get the house back. Based on what we said earlier, the deed registering Amy Cheng was dated the 23rd of May 2000, and Sunny's police report was dated the 19th of June 2000. So, less than a month after the sale, Sunny was effectively moving to act, which is legally exactly what you're meant to do. Given the fact that we're talking about land or real estate, as the Americans say, I can imagine that although there is no time period laid down in law as to how quickly you need to act, because basically it just goes on a case-by-case basis, less than a month, as we had here, between the fraud and the alerting of authorities is well within any time limit I'm aware of. That is, if indeed we're talking about all parties wanting to achieve justice here. I can see a year or even 6 months being too long to then snatch the house back away from Centex, but 3 weeks or so, yes. However, there is no trace of the court ever entertaining or suggesting such a remedy. Whether these points were argued or not, there's no trace of such points being raised. If the points would have been raised, then this would have meant the court, and more specifically, Judge Goliath, would have been forced to explain reasons for the judgment in favour of Centex in more detail. Based on what I can glean from the very little information available, the court sidestepped any of these arguments by simply refusing Sunny the ability to hand in his paperwork, proving that the power of attorney was forged in the first place, alongside the paperwork showing that the fraudsters had been arrested and convicted. You know, I also read somewhere that Sunny, having long since run out of funds, was representing himself. You know, I've been studying law for over 26 years, and so equitable subrogation makes some sense to me, I think, unless anyone corrects me. So I can't imagine the hours and days Sunny must have put in to getting himself this far and trying to unpick a complex web of fraud and legal rights. However, to Sunny and Sue, the situation was simple. They had their own take on what had happened and quite simply alleged that at the time Centex handed over the mortgage monies, Centex were aware that they were giving money to fraudsters. In a nutshell, Sunny was saying that Centex were part of the scam, part of the gang involved in the mortgage fraud. I can easily see why, based on the constant brick walls the brothers came up against, that they came to this conclusion for sure. Nonetheless, in 2009, so just under 9 years after the initial forged power of attorney, Sunny decided to attempt to reason with the judge and write to him personally. The letter that Sheu sent to the judge was dated January the 6th, 2009. In the letter, Sunny complained to Judge Goliath that he had been denied his right to discovery. Sunny went on to say that had the original arresting detectives, Keith Ng and Kin Lee, been allowed to testify early when the case began in 2001, the two would have exposed Centex's involvement in the mortgage scam. Now, what you must know here, guys, because it does have some relevance for reasons that we'll go into later on, is that Sunny's English was not perfect. It was a kind of broken English, which, although slightly harder to understand, had no problem in getting the point across. I have a copy of that letter, which Sunny sent to Judge Goliath, and which is publicly available, and again, there's a link to it in our episode page. The letter reads as follows. It's over 8 years. We have been prohibited to have any New York civil procedure legal rules, most basic, due process, to discovery, to depositions, to subpoena, to counterclaims, to cross-claim again and again, and our third-party summon has been ignored too. After contacting NYPD Commissioner Mr. Raymond W. Kelly in 109, he agreed that Detective Keith Ng and Detective Kin Lee, who investigation the crime, should testify to you about the bank's officer and closing lawyer violated law, and the bank's closing lawyer intentionally accepted fake deposit of residential contract of sales, fake money order, fake cheque, falsified bank records to endorse the fraudulent mortgage and got some money for himself. There are no reasons you freed all the criminals $0 of judgment at all. Would you mind to schedule a hearing as soon as possible? Sunny Sheu. Sunny also sent a copy of the letter to Administrative Judge Jeremy Weinstein, and he hand-delivered the letter to Judge Goliath's residence. In his 2009 interview with Black Star News, and I quote, Sheu says, he decided to take the letter to the judge's residence because in the 9 years he'd been fighting the case, the judge had appeared no more than 5 times, even though records show nearly 30 official court sessions, end quote. On the 14th of January 2009, which was about a week after Sheu left the letter at Judge Goliath's residence, Sunny says that when he stepped out of the judge's courtroom after submitting some documents, and while he was still inside the Queen's Courthouse, 2 men in plain clothes approached him. The following account of what happened, and in Sunny's words, are taken from a statement that Sunny wrote on the 18th of January 2009, and which was 4 days after his run-in with the NYPD, which was sent in a letter to the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, complaining about Judge Goliath. It reads, on the 14th of January, I went to Justice Goliath's court session. Earlier, I had submitted the letter from Detective Keith Ng and Detective Kin Lee, saying that they were willing to testify without subpoena. As I stepped out of the courtroom inside the courthouse, 2 plainclothes police approached me, displayed their guns, and ordered me to go with them. When I asked why, they said they needed to talk with me about the mortgage fraud case. They ordered me to enter an unmarked car and drove me to the Queen's DA's office, where we entered the building through a side door. Then they took me to a small room in Queen's DA office, but they changed subject, acting just like mobsters in the Godfather movies. Then they told me we were not going to talk about the mortgage fraud case. Instead, they verbally abused me and threatened me that I should stop complaining. 2 hours shouting that my house belongs to the bank. They told me again and again not to file allegations of bias and discrimination by Justice Goliath. They told me that I should never contact NYPD Commissioner and Detective Keith Ng and Detective Kin Lee. If Detective Ng and Detective Lee testify, Justice Goliath will be forced to accept the facts that the bank's closing lawyer intentionally falsified closing documents to endorse the phony closing and produced a fraudulent mortgage against our house and got some money for himself. Then the bank lose legal capacity to against us, but the police request me, don't send a letter about Detective Ng. Detective Lee want to testify without subpoena to Justice Goliath. At any rate, they don't want Detective Ng and Detective Lee to testify at all. But Detective Ng and Detective Lee willing to testify without subpoena because of the criminals who committed the fraud, got $0 of judgment, free to walk away, and their house, no need to be foreclosed, and the bank's closing lawyer ran away. Also, 2 police mentioned every place has gang. Our houses belong to bank. The bank needs to foreclose it. Anyway, inside the small room, they then tried to find the reasons to lock me up. So they even questioned about my tax issues, my income, my immigration issues. Also, check my pocket, my ID, my credit cards. Use my hand to do body search. They keep threatening at me. They force me to agree. If I file any complaint about Justice Goliath and discrimination or send a letter about Detective Ng, Detective Lee willing to testify without subpoena, they will arrest me. I am sure Justice Goliath used Inside Connection to arrange this police show-off. This is not first time Justice Goliath using Inside Connection. In Queen's DA, the other strange thing had happened on or about the 3rd of the 2nd, 2005. After the Queen's DA and NYPD arrested the criminals who committed the fraud, Justice Galaya called to the DA office, Jason Garlick, requested me don't go to press release because before the 2nd of the 2nd, 2005, Justice Galaya had foreclosed our house for $1,000 to the bank. It's a serious mistake and misconduct. Jason Garlick, DA's office, may face two big pressures. He has not only requested me don't go to press release personally, he also called to Detective Ng to request me don't go to press release. I have filed complaint about this to your office long ago. Justice Galaya has done his best to prohibit us to have any New York CPLR due process to have and discovery, deposition, subpoena, counterclaim, cross-claim since case began in 2001, over 8 years. Now Justice Galaya using police show off again to prohibit Detective Ng and Detective Lee to testify the facts about the bank's closing lawyer committed crimes in favour the bank to foreclose our house. The two police just too crazy, although they have known that I have contacted their commissioner to get Detective Ng and Detective Lee to testify without subpoena. Very truly yours, Sunny Sheu. I find Sunny's statement we've just read particularly powerful as it just sums up the absolute frustration and futility of his situation. Later, a spokesperson for the District Attorney's Office, and Mr Kevin Ryan, confirmed that indeed Sheu had been detained but refused to state a reason for that detention or provide a warrant or reveal who ordered the detention or provide any information of what took place during the detention. The NYPD has also refused to provide any of this information, except an email informing Sheu that he was detained due to a complaint of aggravated harassment by an unnamed party for placing a letter in Galaya's mailbox. Again, a copy of that email is publicly available. Judge Galaya finally issued a judgment of repossession sale on the 7th of April 2009. The sale occurred on the 15th of May 2009, and on the 27th of May 2009, Sheu appeared before Judge Galaya with Stephen Katz, a lawyer. Judge Galaya denied Sheu's motion to vacate the order for repossession and sale. Sunny's claim was that the property had been obtained by fraud and by forgery of a power of attorney, to which Judge Galaya wrote, "This assertion is intentionally misleading and disingenuous at best." In June 2009, Sheu met twice with a criminal investigator at the US Attorney's Office in the Southern District for a total of about 4 hours and discussed his case and submitted documentation. And so, it was at this stage really, in June of 2009, that the dawn of realisation that he was wasting his time trying to fight for his home finally hit Sunny like a 10-ton of bricks. But hey, Sunny just didn't give up there like most of us would have done. He had spent almost a decade of his life trying to get justice, which for him had most definitely not been served. And so, Sunny realised that he had to find another way to bring attention to what had happened to him and to look for another way to expose what seemed to be a corrupt and rotten system of authorities working together to rip off little guys just like him. So, Sunny utilised his technical knowledge and spent hours, days and weeks investigating Judge Galaya to see whether there were any other areas of the judge's life which were in any way indicative of any wrongful conduct. One day, Sunny struck gold. He had found a publicly available list of the various properties and land owned by the judge. With the list in hand, Sunny went to the Judicial Ethics Department to check the list against the judge's financial disclosure forms. By law in America, it is a must for certain officials, like Judge Galaya, to be absolutely transparent in revealing all of their assets. Well, what Sunny unearthed was that there were major discrepancies between what the judge had officially declared and what he actually had, including a $1 million beach home on Breezy Point, Long Island. Sheu's allegations were enough to get the director of the ethics department, Janice Howard, to ask Judge Galaya for an amended financial disclosure statement. Sunny was looking forward to receiving the amended financial disclosure from Judge Galaya, although he understood it may take some time to process. Meanwhile, desperate to resolve his situation, on June the 23rd, 2009, Sheu again filed an order to show just cause for a temporary restraining order to halt any further action, even though the sale of his home had already occurred. He demanded that detectives Keith Ng and Kin Lee, now both retired, and who had investigated the fraudulent 23rd of May 2000 closing, be permitted to testify. Judge Bernice D. Siegel ordered a pause in any additional proceedings with respect to the sale of the property, with a return hearing date of the 8th of July 2009. At the 8th of July hearing, Judge Galaya set another hearing date for the 15th of July 2009, at which time Sheu was to produce cancelled cheques for all payments he had made over the last 9 years on the property for taxes, insurance payments, utilities and so on. It was stated by the media present at the hearing, so again Black Star News, that this was a difficult hearing with, and I quote, Judge Galaya kept shouting at Sheu, who was unable to produce receipts. Sheu, on the other hand, kept shouting at the judge about the 23rd of May 2000 fraudulent conveyance he insisted was at the root of his predicament. This is junk justice. Nobody is above the law except Judge Galaya, the Black Star News reported, were Sunny's last words as he left the courtroom. Ultimately, the house was foreclosed on, and Sunny and Sue finally lost possession of the property and their home to Centex. So, we've seen Sunny and Sue fight for 9 years for their home, which ultimately was a fight they lost. We've seen Sunny go up against a supremely powerful judge, and despite his efforts, contributing factors like lack of money and resources has meant that Sunny was no further forward than when he had started. You would think that that would be the end of the story, wouldn't you? Well, it isn't. There's more to come, which is even more breathtaking and bewildering than what we've laid out so far, can you imagine? So, it's at this point we turn to our third and final part of this episode, which is the end. On the 9th of April 2010, so 10 years after the mortgage fraud had come to light, Sunny emailed Special Supervising Agent Rachel Rojas of the New York FBI. Mr. Sheu told Rojas that he had been kidnapped by the detectives and been warned that if he went to the media about his mortgage case or filed complaints against Judge Galaya, he would be killed. Sheu also met personally with Agent Rojas at her office at 26 Federal Plaza, where he pleaded for witness protection. He was basically in fear of his life. Sunny provided the FBI agent with hundreds of pages of evidence about the mortgage fraud. Rojas told Sheu that the FBI only investigates mortgage fraud cases in which the property is worth over $1 million. Regarding Sheu's plea for witness protection, Rojas's only official reply was a one-line email which read, "Thanks, Sunny, be careful and be well." Again, both Sunny's email to Rojas as well as her one-sentence email is publicly available and in our episode notes for you to look at. Now, remember earlier when we said that it seems that Judge Galaya had not declared all his financial interests and that Sunny had complained about this? Well, on the 23rd of June 2010, Sunny was contacted by the Ethics Department to advise that Judge Galaya's amended financial disclosure was finally available. Sunny, along with his friend Will Gallison, went to pick up his copy of the amended statement. Will recorded the whole scene on video camera. When he saw the amended statement, Sunny couldn't quite believe that there was still a very large and significant omissions, and Galaya still had not properly declared his assets. Sunny was understandably super excited by this and shouted very loudly, "Now I've got him. I've got enough evidence to put Galaya in jail." This statement was not only recorded on camera, but also overheard by the whole office of the Ethics Department. Will was so panicked by the fact that so many people had overheard this statement that he apparently advised Sunny to shut up And now there could be even more of a situation if this state got back to Judge Goliath. Finally, whether it was the fact that his friend had seemed so worried, or whether now the house had actually been foreclosed on for good, and so some of the adrenaline that must have kept Sunny going for 10 long years had levelled off, it seems that the music finally stopped, and Sunny realised the danger he was now in. So, in an effort to protect himself, Will Gallison, Sunny's friend, had helped Sunny to record a video in April of 2009, which they hoped they would never need to use. However, the pair now immediately posted the video onto YouTube. I said earlier on in the episode that we would hear from Sunny later on in the episode, and since we are now at later on, I'm going to play Sunny's video. It's fairly short at 1 minute and 49 seconds, but here it comes. There's also a link to this video in the show notes.
Okay, recording.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sunny Sheu. I have filed a complaint to the FBI and the New York State Unified Court EC Committee about the Judge Joseph Gloria falsified his financial disclosure statement. And I have submitted evidence to the FBI. Recently, FBI returned me a copy of the evidence that I sent to the FBI. Okay, and today, April 9th, Unified Court EC Committee Director Janice Hoover, she told me Judge Joseph Gloria already amended his financial disclosure statement. It means my evidence is true. At least he was supposed to amend
Misrepresentation.
Misrepresentation on his financial disclosure statement. And for the security issue, for the security concern, I make this recording. And if anything wrong goes to me, it should be come from Judge Gloria and his people, because before I have been kidnapped by his people,
Threatened.
by his and threatened and intimidated by his people, not file a complaint against Judge Gloria. So I make this recording for the safety, for the protection. If anything wrong, please go to the Judge Gloria and his people. Thanks.
Just say thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you actually watch the video, you'll see the look of absolute horror and disbelief on Sunny Sheu's face. His complexion is grey and waxy, and it's almost as if he's still trying to work out whether this is just an incredibly vivid nightmare or his real-world personal hell. 3 days after that incident at the ethics office, when Sunny had declared that he now had the evidence to put Goliath behind bars for financial irregularities, and on June the 26th, 2010, at 3:15 p.m, 3 separate members of the public called emergency services to report a man laying on the ground who was non-responsive, so basically unconscious, yet bleeding and seemingly having a convulsion of some kind on 130th Street, Flushing, Queens. There is a link to those 3 911 calls in the episode show notes for this podcast. The guy laying in the street was, of course, Sunny Sheu, the guy that had been through so much for 10 long years, yet a guy who had got up every single day to fight his corner was now, it seemed, in a very touch-and-go situation. A police report detailing the circumstances in which Sunny had been found is detailed in a memo sent from the NYPD to the New York Medical Examiner and is publicly available. The memo reads as follows. The undersigned conferred with Detective Austin of the 109th Precinct Squad. He reports that the decedent was witnessed to collapse at the above location. The 911 caller was interviewed by the emergency services and police officers. The 911 caller stated that the decedent was walking with a pedometer in his hand when he collapsed. The squad is holding this case as an accident with no criminality. It seems to me curious that the police report and the 3 911 calls that were made by members of the public stand in direct conflict with each other, since not one of the 911 callers reports seeing Sunny collapse. They all report him already laying on the ground. As I understand it, and to date, no witness has ever come forward or been identified who actually reported seeing Sunny collapse. On its own, this fact probably wouldn't be as disturbing as it is when we put it together with what else went on after Sunny had been found in the street, and which we'll discuss now. Sunny was taken to hospital by the emergency services. Dr. Zishan Ahmed was the attending physician who was on duty at the hospital that day and who examined Sunny on arrival. It's been reported that Dr. Ahmed was spoken to by police prior to Sunny's arrival. What about, I wonder, as does everyone else who has an interest in this case. Anyhow, once Sunny arrived at the hospital, police officers and ambulance workers who had transported Sunny advised Dr. Ahmed that Sunny had some kind of blunt force head trauma. Yet, after examining Sunny shortly after arrival at the hospital, Dr. Ahmed and 2 nurses explained to Sunny's friends, and I quote, "We've got a CAT scan of his head. There's no signs of trauma on his head. There's no fractures. He doesn't have any signs of being injured. Not a lump, not a bump, not a scratch on his head." Here is a recording of Dr. Ahmed, which is publicly available and again linked in our show notes, and which was recorded by friends of Sunny, where he essentially repeats what I've just said.
So, we got a CAT scan of his head. He's got a massive bleed throughout his brain. It's called a subarachnoid hemorrhage.
And did you relieve the pressure?
No.
Why?
So, first of all, this wasn't traumatic, most likely. There's no signs of trauma on his head. There's no fractures. So, what this probably was an aneurysm that burst.
He was jogging. I was told he was jogging.
Yeah.
So he had to fall and hit his head.
Not
He
necessarily.
doesn't have a head injury.
You can't come to that conclusion.
He doesn't have
He
any
doesn't have
marks
any
on
signs
his
of
head.
injuries. If he fell,
Nothing. If he had fallen and hit his head hard enough to give him a bleed like that,
he would have had
we would
some
have
kind
seen
of...
something on his skull. There is nothing. Not a scratch,
There's not a scratch on his head.
not a lump, not a bump, nothing.
So, it was at 8:15 p.m. on the 26th of June 2010, and only a few hours after arrival at the hospital, Sunny Sheu was pronounced dead. According to Sheu's death certificate, which is publicly available, the cause of Sunny's death was a blunt force trauma to the head, causing skull fractures and brain injuries. This information, of course, stands in direct conflict with the initial assessment made by Dr. Ahmed, which seems, well, like I said, curious. 5 days after the death of Sunny, a journalist by the name of Milton Alimardi from Black Star News, that small independent newspaper who had first printed Sheu's story in 2009, gave a sworn affidavit, meaning a legally binding statement, regarding information that had been given to him by Dr. Ahmed. The document is publicly available and linked in the show notes, but it reads as follows. I, Milton Alimardi, swear that the following statement is true to the best of my knowledge and recollection. Soon after the death of Sunny Sheu, aka Sun Ming Sheu, on the 26th of June 2010 at New York Hospital of Queens, I had a phone conversation with Dr. Zishan Ahmed, the physician in residence who treated Mr. Sheu. Dr. Ahmed had spoken with my colleague and fellow reporter, William Gallison, who went to the hospital on the 26th of June 2010, the night of Mr. Sheu's death. Dr. Ahmed told Mr. Gallison that there was no head trauma, not a scratch on Mr. Sheu's head, and that Sheu died of a subarachnoid hemorrhage. As a result of his diagnosis, Ahmed did not give Sheu the essential treatment for head trauma. 3 days later, the medical examiner, Dr. Michael Greenberg, concluded that Sheu had died from blunt force trauma with skull fractures and brain injuries, and that there was in fact no subarachnoid hemorrhage. I asked Dr. Ahmed how he could reconcile the critical discrepancy between what he had told Mr. Gallison and Dr. Greenberg's official determination, and asking specifically if foul play was involved. Ahmed confirmed by clearly stating, yes, there was foul play. He also said he wished he could tell me more, but that he was precluded from doing so because of doctor-client confidentiality. I am willing to repeat the above statement under oath, under any legal jurisdiction and proceeding. I'm also willing to take a lie detector test to confirm the veracity of this statement and would invite Dr. Ahmed to submit to the same. In another twist to this story, official records show that a person unconnected and not authorised by Sunny's family collected Sunny's body from the morgue and ordered the cremation of Sunny's body. So, when all is said and done, what conclusions can we draw on this whole situation? Well, Sunny Sheu and his brother were, in 2000, victims of fraud, which ultimately meant that they lost their home. Sunny and his brother did not get, by any stretch of the imagination, a fair trial. It seems their case was never properly argued. There were missing court records, and the judge presiding over the case was a judge who had failed to disclose his assets on more than one occasion and for a number of years. Despite his many accolades and successes, it's a level of dishonesty which calls into question his honesty, integrity and suitability to wield such power over anyone's life if he himself could not follow the rules. Sunny made it clear to Judge Galaya that he was not going to stop investigating the judge and was also in touch with the media. Sunny was illegally detained by police officers, and there is an admission that he was detained with no rebuttal or denial of the allegations made by Sunny and later confirmed by him in a sworn statement. The police said that they had a witness stating that Sunny fell down, but it transpired that they did not. The examining doctor said that Sunny had died of an aneurysm and then confessed that he'd lied about it. Sunny died from blunt force trauma to the head, as confirmed by the official medical examiner's report. Those are the facts of the case. As of the time of recording of this podcast, so January 2023, and despite the detailed and continuous efforts of Sheu's friends, so Will Gallison for example, there has been no investigation into the death of Sunny Sheu or the circumstances leading up to it. Sunny's friends keep the fight going, and the twists and turns that have occurred in trying to bring Sunny's case to light would definitely double the length of this podcast if I were to detail them. Sunny Sheu was a Taiwanese immigrant who, by all accounts, was a computer whiz kid, but who spoke broken English. I said this fact was relevant earlier, and I'll tell you why. It's no coincidence that Sunny accused Judge Galaya, as well as the system, of, amongst other things, discrimination on more than one occasion. Had Sunny been born in America and have enough money to pay for a lawyer, things probably wouldn't have ended this way for him. I'm not sure if there's anyone who would disagree with this statement, is there? You know, my favourite legal quote comes from an American lawyer called Thurgood Marshall, who once said, "When you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country, this is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on." So, pass Sunny's story on. Don't let Sunny Sheu be forgotten. Sunny died from blunt force trauma to the head. That's an official fact. He didn't hit himself over the head or cause his own injuries, so who did? If you'd like to subscribe to the Chattory and help to support us and keep us ad-free, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Chattory and never miss a single thing. Membership benefits include everything from birthday shout-outs to newsletters to being able to get your hands on some Chattory merch. As always, if you'd like to reach out and join in the conversation, then please email me on jazz@thechattory.com or drop me a WhatsApp message or voice note on 07506 704 705. Of course, if you're calling from outside the UK, you'll need to put in the country code for the UK, which is +44. Alternatively, head over to thechattory.com and you can get all the details on the Chattory website. So, from me, your host, Jazz O'Brien, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with a brand new episode. The Chattory, the definitive compendium of conversation, insight and intrigue since 2022.
Thank you so much, guys and girls, for listening to The Chatter with Jazz O'Brien. Follow us on thechattory.com and never miss an episode. Join the conversation by dropping us a WhatsApp message, question, or voice note, or email jazz@thechattory.com. Till next time.